We'll go ahead and call the Board of Zoning Appeals meeting to order. We'd like to request that the staff confirmation that the Kansas Open Meetings Act required notice has been properly provided.
I confirm packet was posted and required notice was provided.
Next will be a roll call.
So we'll call roll here. Board Member Sharp. Board Member Miles.
Here.
Board Member Olson.
Here.
Chair Dorsweiler.
Here.
That has us with a attendance of 3 board members. That is a quorum. And with our Open Meeting Act requirements being met, we can now proceed with today's agenda.
Thank you. Next, we'll have approval of our minutes from January 20th, 2020. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? If not, is there a motion?
I'd make a motion to approve the minutes from the January 20th meeting.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, we'll move on to new business. Application V22-1.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This application has been filed by the City of Salina Public Works Department, and the request is a request from a variance of 35 feet from 75 feet, the minimum front yard setback required on an arterial street, to 0 feet to allow a new sanitation truck storage building to extend out to the front property line adjacent to Ash Street. And the property that is being discussed with this application is the General Services Division campus, which is located on the south side of Ash Street, west of Front Street. So as you exit downtown on East Ash, you pass on the south side the Salina Fieldhouse, the Western Star Mill, and then you come to the General Services Division campus. And so this property was originally purchased by the city in 1943, and then there were additional acquisitions made in 1950 and 1960. The total campus there is 4 acres, but that 4 acres includes a portion of the nearby river channel because the ownership extends to the center of the channel. And so right now we have on campus a building referred to as the street barn, the general services offices, a building referred to as central garage, and then there's a maintenance building that's at the east end of the campus. And so the request here is a front yard setback variance to allow an existing storage building that's located in roughly the same location to be replaced with a new larger storage building. And that new larger storage building would be used to house and store the new sanitation trash compactor trucks. And so these are larger and newer than the trucks that they replaced. And for continuity of operations and keeping everything close together, they wish to store them on this campus. And first of all, they need a larger facility. Second of all, the current facility that's there is somewhat dilapidated. And to get access and maneuvering on site, they need the building to be close to Ash Street as possible. So we've included some information in your packet that we have on the screen there, but essentially this would be a 44 by 120 foot building. It would have 7 south-facing doors. It would provide indoor storage and keep the fleet out of the elements. It would allow for daily maintenance checks. It would allow for engine heat blockers to be, or block heaters to be provided. One of the bays will be a wash bay, and then this will also be close by central garage for truck services and repair. This property is zoned I-2, has been zoned I-2 for an extended period. Even though it's publicly owned, it does have an industrial character to it, and it has a situation where it is located on Ash Street, which is considered a minor arterial street. And so There's a number of unique things about the property, but it's outside the historical downtown, but still carries on that downtown development pattern of most of the buildings being at or near the front property line. And so if you look at the south side of Ash Street, almost all the buildings and improvements there are close to the street. You've got the river channel to the back and to the east, and because of that, it's required most of the buildings to be located towards the front of the lot. The other thing that's unique is that Ash Street, although it's an arterial, only has 80 feet of right-of-way. And so, from staff's perspective, this is a one-for-one replacement. It will just replace an existing structure in roughly the same location. If you've driven by, there's a screening fence there, and so the location of the setback will not stick out or be noticeable to neighboring property owners or passersby on Ash. Also, if you're approaching the property from the east, there's a wooded riverbank that extends to near Ash Street, so this will be barely visible from the properties to the east. As far as the hardship, staff would agree that if you strictly applied the 75-foot from center line setback to this complex, it would make it unusable for trucks and other large vehicles. That setback is necessary to allow the trucks to maneuver on site and access the storage bays from the south. We're not changing any driveways or locations of driveways or impacting driveways, so we don't see this as having an impact on traffic safety by being moved closer to the street. And we don't believe that approval of the variance would undermine or defeat the purpose of having a setback requirement in the I-2 district, because if you look at the prevailing setback along that portion of Ash, this is consistent with that. So we've laid out on page 6 some suggested findings that the board could make in support of this variance request. And in terms of this location and this request, you have 3 options. You could approve the front yard setback variance with or without any conditions. You could postpone action on this application to a future date if you think additional information is required to make a decision, or you could deny the Public Works Department's variance request if you don't think findings can be made to support a variance. Our recommendation would be to approve the front yard setback request as submitted based on the findings we've outlined on page 6 and 7. We didn't have any recommended conditions or special conditions that we identified on this, but if there's something that you identify, then you could certainly, we would assist you with crafting any conditions that you might have that you want to add to any action you would take. But with that, we have Jim Teutsch, the Director of Public Works here, if you have questions about this facility specifically or general services facility in general, but would start with any questions that you have on the report.
Are there any questions for staff?
I don't.
Jim, did you want to say anything?
Mr. Chair and board members, first, thank you for allowing us to bring this to you. My name is Jim Teutsch. I'm the Director of Public Works. And prior to me taking over the Department of Public Works, I was the Operations Manager at General Services. Mr. Kowach, the applicant that is before you, is currently the operations manager, and he is currently leading another board meeting, or Mr. Kowach would have been here, but I offered to fill in for him. I do have a lot of experience with this site, and I'm very well aware of this particular plan. I think the only thing that I would highlight to you is over the years that I was at General Services and since Jim's becoming the operations manager and taking over General Services, it may not be noticeable to most people, but every year we set aside money in our budget to make improvements to our site. It is a strong personal belief of mine that we should strive to be good neighbors, and toward that end, we've put up a new flag display in front of the General Services Administration building. We replaced the glass enclosures on the north and west sides of the building. This past year, we repaired all of the damaged, rusted metal that was on the administration building and then repainted the entire structure. In other years, we've replaced the roof and we've installed automatic gates, and every year we continue to try to identify projects that would not only maintain this facility for use by the city, but just that in that we would, strive to be good neighbors. We're sensitive of the fact of where we are located. It's a little unusual for many public works facilities, and we want to do our best to be accommodating to people there. One of the things that I think that I would also like to point out is on the back side of our facility is the river channel. And we're all aware that there's a river channel project in the works, and the particular area where we are, directly behind the community theater, is going to be a focal point of the future river development. And one of the things that struck me is I would hate to put this kind of investment into the river channel and all the improvements that are intended for that area, only to have residents looking at the back ends of our trash trucks and salt spreaders hanging in open view of all of the improvements that are being made on the river. We would intend to design this building very much in keeping with the existing buildings that we have now, so I would suspect that we would try to match the paint colors and things like that. I think that's probably it. Maybe one more thing that I should point out, this initial drawing that I made of the front of the building that you see on your screen, we did subsequently learn that I will have to move the wash bay to the west end of that building, so down there where it says service bay. So the service bay and the wash bay are sitting together, and it was brought to my attention by engineer consultant and our facilities manager that just from a operational standpoint, access to water lines and those kinds of things, it would make sense to co-locate those. We wouldn't change the number of doors, but the double bay, wash bay door would most likely be moved so that it is adjacent to the service bay. And I thought that was probably worth pointing out. And then I would certainly be happy to answer any other questions that you might have about this project.
Are there any questions for board members?
So metal fab building is the intention, so no brick or anything like that, just stay with a metal fab building for the entire thing, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then just to ask so that it's been asked, so I know you're removing 2 existing structures, putting it in there, so city doesn't have another location where you could do this same type of building?
Not at present. I don't have any other real estate that I think would work. And Mr. Andrew mentioned, and it's worth repeating, that it's very critical that I keep the structure as close to central garage as possible. Okay. We have a limited number of mechanics that are available for all of the city fleet, and these are fairly high maintenance vehicles. There's a lot of hydraulics involved, and generally we'll have a vehicle that will require mechanics' attention. And so that would be another really important reason for me to try to locate them as close as possible to the central garage.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions from the public or comments from the public? If not, is there a motion from the board?
I would make a motion to approve application V22-1 filed by the City of Salina Public Works Department.
Is there a second?
I would second that.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next, we will go on to application V22-2.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. These are separate but related applications. They are being considered separately and independently because they relate to different locations and properties. But related to the first item, there's currently in the location proposed for the storage of the sanitation trucks, the city's existing salt spreader racks where salt is loaded onto trucks for placement on city streets when there's snow or ice forecasted or falling. And so the location that they're proposing to be relocated to is over in the vicinity of North 3rd Street and East Elm. And this property was acquired by the city in 1991 as a future site for a new water distribution warehouse because the city was out of room at its water plant site on South 5th Street. And so you can see that there's been a number of facilities added here that support city services. The city has a fueling facility in Canopy there. That's where police cars and other city vehicles will fuel up. There's a water distribution warehouse, office, and shop related to support for our water utility. There's a household hazardous waste drop-off place there, both an office and storage building. There's a water distribution warehouse used to park and store city vehicles, and then a general storage building for the city's sanitary sewer maintenance division. So this is also a front yard setback request, and the existing salt spreader rack needs to be relocated to make room for a new sanitation truck storage building that you just reviewed at the last application. A reduced setback for the south structure is needed to allow the salt spreader trucks to maneuver on site and to access both the south and north facing buildings. So it's a little fuzzy on this drawing, but this is Elm Street here. This is referred to, 3rd Street is actually, it looks like a street. The public right-of-way is actually vacated, but it's a shared private road with the warehouse on this side and the city on this side. This is the south salt spreader rack structure. This is the north structure, and there's a need to maintain sufficient separation in here so that the vehicles can go in there and maneuver and back in and load. So the request in this case is not to go to 0, but to go to 10 feet along the Elm Street right-of-way. This has the same setback implications, except Elm Street is not considered an arterial street. And so the minimum setback here is 25 feet instead of 75 feet from center line. And so this property, if you look to the west and you look to the east, it's uniquely situated because you have a building to the west that has a 0 setback, and you have a warehouse directly to the east that also has a 0 setback. So again, this is unique in terms of having property zoned I-2, but having buildings with a 0 setback. The city owns property to the north of this location and also to the west. The property owner on the other side of the street, which is a warehouse, also has a 0 setback and is located right close to the intersection of 3rd and Elm. And so if this south row of salt spreader racks were required to be relocated 10 feet to the north, there wouldn't be sufficient space between the rows to allow city trucks to maneuver in and out of the loading area. So we did not identify, because of the surrounding development pattern and who the owners are, we didn't identify any neighbors that would be adversely affected by the location of this building. We've looked carefully at the vision triangle. I don't know if you have the color rendering of that, Allison. Might be the next one. So we'll, but to the top of that view there is ample room, the way this is set back, to allow for visibility for traffic exiting on Elm Street, and it's actually going to be more impacted by the warehouse looking to your east than it will be by this building. And because of the width of the right-of-way, this building will be 30 feet from the curb line while being 10 feet from the property line. So we don't see this variance request. If it's approved, it's not going to undermine or defeat the purpose of having a front yard setback requirement in the I-2 district. It will just allow these racks to match existing development pattern on the north side of Elm. So we have highlighted on page 5, we've offered some findings we think can be made in support of this front yard variance request. We think this request has some of the same characteristics as the case you just previously heard, and so you could approve it as requested. You could postpone this to a future meeting date if you think additional information is required. You could deny the request outright if you don't think findings support a variance. Our recommendation would be to approve this as requested, and we again didn't have any special conditions or anything to add to that. So with that, staff would be open to any questions. Mr. Teutsch would be open to any questions about how this building would be used.
Any questions for staff? Any questions for the applicant? Any questions from the public? If not, is there a motion?
I'd make a motion to approve application V22-2 filed by the City of Salina Public Works Department.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carries.
So both of those applications have been approved, and we'll communicate your decision to Mr. Teutsch and Mr. Kowach, so they know they can now begin working with design professionals to design these buildings specifically.
Is there any unfinished business to come before the board?
We don't have any other administrative items. In terms of other business, I would note that the City Commission appointed Mr. Justin Owens, who is an employee of Cobb Valley Engineering, to the Board of Zoning Appeals. Mr. Owens was unable to make this first meeting, but we now have bumped our membership up to 5, so that's good. And we're uncertain about the when or if we will have our next meeting. The April meeting, at this point, we do have something filed for that, so it seems pretty certain that we'll be having a meeting on that third Thursday of April. And then I would share with you that Allison has been our administrative assistant assisting this board, and this is going to be her last meeting because she's taken a different opportunity and going in a different direction, and so this is her last official duty serving the Board of Zoning Appeals, so you might want to wish her well. But we'll look to see unless Mr. Toich has something under the public forum, we'll look to Allison to see there's nobody on Zoom that might wish to speak. So unless Mr. Toich has something under public forum, then we could move on to consider adjournment. So,
Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
I would make that motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion carries. Meeting is adjourned.